Please welcome Skift Director of Research Data Product, Wouter Geerts.
Good morning everyone. It's great to have you all here. Whether you work in business, in government, in an NGO, I'm sure all of you have great partners, right? We at Skift Research, one of our great partners is McKinsey & Company, and I'm very happy today to announce a new report that we're launching right now, really. We've been working with McKinsey & Company for over 2 years now. In those 2 years, we've now produced 3 reports, really hard-hitting thought leadership reports on what's happening in the travel industry. The first one we did 2 years ago in the middle of the pandemic was all about what's happening around us, making sense of what's happening, and really giving travel insiders an idea of what can we do with the current situation that we're dealt with. Last year, we did a report on the consumer experience, customer experience, and really understanding and helping the travel industry understand of now that demand is returning, how are we going to deal with that? And if you haven't read that report, by the way, I think today it's still as relevant as it was last year, so please go and download that. And so, like I said, today we're launching our next report, and that report is called Accelerating the Transition to Net Zero Travel. It's all about environmental sustainability. You can download it right now for free. You can go to skift.com as well. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to find the link there too. Please take this back to your teams. There's a lot of amazing insights in this report. We're utilizing all of the knowledge that McKinsey has from talking to the industry, as well as obviously our own insights that we have of talking to the travel industry. We've interviewed a lot of really high executives. A lot of them will actually be on stage today as well for this report. We've surveyed consumers. There's a lot of very key takeaways and plans and action points that you can take away, and to really understand how can we get to net zero as a travel company. So there's 4 strategies in the report to really help you understand of where am I today, where am I going, how do I set targets, how do I achieve them, what do I focus on, and what opportunities are there out there. So the report sort of has 4 strategies. First of all, really helping you to identify, sequence decarbonization initiatives, really understanding what targets do I need to set, how do I do this. We're putting out a framework to help you to achieve that. We talk about how to partner with business travelers to help you to decarbonize quicker. We talk about leisure travel as well, and overcoming some of the issues that we have there with the say-do gap, or the attitude-behavior gap, where consumers say they want to change, but don't necessarily always do it. So how do we overcome that issue? And finally, we provide a lot of insights and highlight opportunities of how you can continue to build your company by integrating more green practices. So to talk a little bit more about all of those 4 points, we're going to have a panel discussion now with Hertz and McKinsey. So I'd like to welcome our panelists on stage.
Now, for our panel discussion, please welcome Senior Partner at McKinsey & Company, Danielle Bozarth, and Senior Vice President of Operations Initiatives at Hertz Corporation, Jeff Nieman, in discussion with Skift Director of Research Data Product, Wouter Geerts.
Thank you both. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. So yeah, very exciting, launch of a new report. Like I said, it's the 3rd one in line with McKinsey. Danielle, I think it would be really good to understand from you why sustainability now? Why are we putting out this report? Has something changed? Are we at a point where this is becoming more relevant? Tell me what you hear from the industry.
I think this is on. Hello? Can you hear me, everyone? I think there's a few things. We are hearing far, far more on sustainability from our clients. We are engaging with many of them on this topic regularly, frankly, and they are struggling to figure out a plan forward. And many of them are getting tremendously more push from multiple of the stakeholders that they deal with. I was with someone last week who had said, we used to get a question about sustainability at the end of our discussions with investors. It's now question number 3 with multiple follow-up questions, and frankly, we don't have very good answers. And so we're hearing that theme pretty broadly. We're also hearing a lot of push from employees, a lot of push from customers, obviously, as each of businesses are making their own net zero pledges. And so although many of my clients have at least set up targets at this point in time, they don't have a clear plan to achieve those targets, and they are increasingly struggling with how do they start to think about and sequence investments to really change their sustainability footprint. Yeah,
really interesting. I think, like I said, I think it would be good to just walk through the report and touch on all of these 4 points that are on the screen. So the first one is very much about helping travel players to understand their current practices, the emissions that come with that, and where to invest or focus around abatement of those emissions. We provide a framework, the marginal abatement cost curve, a lot of...
It really rolls off the tongue.
Exactly, a lot of hard work. But I think, we set it out very well, and we explain how to use that framework. But I think it really comes down to just getting started, right? And really thinking of or coming up with targets, coming up with understanding your business and where should we focus. So, Jeff, I'd love to hear from you sort of what has Hertz done, what is the process that you've been through so far and where you are today?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think, I'll start with just where we are, right, and then talk a little bit about how we've gotten here. So at a very high level, we made a commitment earlier this year to set science-based targets, working through the SBTI process. Sorry if I'm using a lot of acronyms. Hopefully you all know what that means. And, in doing so, I think it gave us the ability to really work through that framework to understand from every phase of our emissions, like where we can actually influence it the most. We're in the mobility space. Right, we own a lot of assets, and so we're heavily indexed towards a phase that we have some control over, right, with vehicle ownership, right, and so that lined up pretty well. Then, as I think about, what you just said about how companies, are really struggling to understand like where to start. I think it really has to start with the people, right, and having alignment from top to bottom. Right, so at the investor level, all the way down through the company, down to the employee level, really so that everybody's rowing in the same direction, right? So we had that alignment. Yep. And, I think it really coalesced around everybody really understanding that the mobility landscape's going through a generational shift right now. We believe that that's being driven by ACES technology, autonomous, connected, electric, and shared mobility. And we see ourselves as a connector through each of those verticals. And so we've started with electrification. And when I think about how that alignment came together, there's a business objective there, that we were able to grasp onto to electrify a fleet, to make really good partnerships across the OEM space, across the rideshare space, to pull forward those efforts that aligned with a business objective. Right? And then you follow a path from that business objective to get to your goals. Yeah. Right? And so I think we've found that formula, and we feel really good, about getting to where we want to be. And we've got some short-term targets to get, our fleet to a 25% electric fleet by 2024, which is where we're starting.
Wow, that's really short-term. Okay.
Yes.
And I guess your case is perfect to sort of highlight that you've got internal decisions to make, but obviously there's a lot of external pressure, but also external infrastructure that is out there that sort of impacts what you can or cannot do. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the challenges that you're facing there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's many. I'll sort of just start with the demand side of things, right? We own a product, we put it out there, you've got to have demand for it, right? And so I think, that's one of the challenges is really trying to shape behaviors in the travel industry for people to lean more towards the EVs that we've put on our platforms. And I think there's, a big shift that has to take place in how people are looking at the products that they're selecting based on a total cost, right? So you may look at an electric vehicle online and say it's priced a little bit higher than what the car next to it is, but if you take into consideration the miles that you're driving, the gas that you're going to spend, versus the savings on the electricity that you're going to have, the net's typically pretty close.
Yeah.
Right, and so I think it's kind of shaping those behaviors, which is taking some time. And then there's really the physical side of it, right? Today we operate in a world where you can gas up a car within minutes. We're going to need to shift to operating in a world where you have to charge a vehicle for hours or several minutes, right, with fast charging. And the grid in and of itself in many places is constrained. And so you don't just have the ability to go put in what you want when you want. And so you really have to partner deeply with a lot of different companies that have unique solutions when you've hit a hurdle, right? Because there are unique solutions out there that you can employ to get over those. And that's really the path that we've taken. And we've made some announcements around some of those partnerships. Some more will come this week.
Okay, interesting. And Danielle, I mean, you work with a lot of travel partners, a lot of travel companies. So what are some of the key challenges that I guess you see companies dealing with today?
Yeah, well, I would note the one that Jeff mentioned a minute ago, which is alignment all the way down through the organization. I think there's certainly a gap right now in terms of what different stakeholders really perceive as being the most important actions. But I also think, as we look at this industry, we're in an industry with a pretty deep and long installed base. And that means that actually changing over and making more sustainable, business models, et cetera, takes a long period of time. Folks are really struggling with how to sequence both capital investments as well as cost investments to create lower carbon footprints, and how to do that when, frankly, some of the technologies aren't fully clear right now, as well as the return, right? We still haven't seen enough of a shift from a consumer perspective and from a business traveler perspective, which we talk about in the report as well, to really justify making some of those investments from a pure ROI perspective. And so that's what companies are really struggling with, is how to sequence them and how to think about them over time, and how to frankly convince their other stakeholders and investors that those investments make sense. Yeah,
and Jeff, when you talk about the demand side, from a business travel point of view, because that's sort of the second point that we touch on in the report, are you seeing a shift? Is procurement of rental cars changing? Is sustainability becoming a bigger topic? Or is in business travel it's the same issue as what you just mentioned, where it's all about cost still today?
Yeah, I think it's actually very similar still.
Okay.
But I expect over time that will change. Right, as we said, like, as that leadership starts to become aligned and there is a goal, I think folks are going to start to realize you've got to shift behaviors and how you travel to get to your goals. And so the calculation of the value of renting that electric vehicle is going to shift. And that's got to then permeate down through through your operations, from procurement to your travel management teams, who are the ones that are focused on signing contracts with rental car companies, and then are pushing policies on what those travelers should do. We're just not there yet, to where those policies have actually gotten themselves down into an organization, and people are really focused on booking EV first. I think that'll change over time as there is more alignment, though. Yeah.
So over time, Danielle, I mean, there's a lot of big companies procuring a lot of business travel. I loved your quote at the beginning about sort of how much more important it is becoming in the boardroom. Are we seeing that in terms of how companies procure travel? And especially for this audience, obviously, what sort of takeaways would you give them in terms of what can they do and how can they set themselves up for maybe a future where ESG or however environmental considerations will become more important when companies are procuring travel?
Yeah. Well, I can start by talking, certainly my clients are spending a lot of time thinking about how they procure travel differently. We obviously are a big purchaser of travel services. It is absolutely core to our business, and it's something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about as well. I can talk a little bit about what we're doing because, for us, we've, like many of our clients, set pretty ambitious net zero targets. We're aiming to be net zero by 2030, and we're also have set 30% reductions in our per capita travel emissions. And for us, that's hard, right? Travel for us is about 80% of our emissions footprint, so it's a big deal. And so a few things that we're focused on that I see many of my other clients We are having conversations about it in our RFP processes. We are starting to pick partners based upon their ability to provide sustainable options. We are much more often providing transparency to our consultants, frankly, who tend to self-book travel in terms of our business approach. We are also debating incentives to try to incent our consultants to make more sustainable choices in their travel. I think there'll be more about that we'll choose to do in that space over time. And then last, we're really spending time trying to source more sustainable options. And I think that's a place where our travel partners can be very helpful to us. For example, in some of the biggest cities that we have a lot of consultants spending nights in hotels, we're trying to identify the 2 to 3 most sustainable hotel options. And the travel industry can certainly be helpful by providing more of those.
Yeah. And if we move on to leisure travel, in the report, we very much focus on what I personally think is one of the key issues today when it comes to leisure travel is sort of, we hear more and more, every survey we do, people say sustainability is really important to us. But when it comes to the checkout, are people really willing to pay for it? Offsets, maybe, do they have a bad rep, maybe, I don't know. How do you encourage people to actually do what they say they want to do? I don't know what has Hertz done to sort of engage the customer more and sort of provide them with either tools, information, or that push to really get them to follow through with their sort of sustainability ideas that they have?
Yeah, well, I think it all starts at the beginning of the process when folks are searching for a vehicle. And, we focused really early on building a custom flow, for people who were going to book an EV. And, it comes with some, it comes with a lot of education, right, to ease people's anxiety around renting an EV. Yep. That's been quite successful. We've seen, tremendous utilization on those assets in this segment. And, I think, look, electric cars are becoming, mainstream. And, every OEM is leaning in, at this point. You see so many announcements that are coming out about the next models that are coming online from every major. Yeah. And, we're a really, really wonderful place to come and get a test drive. Right, and we see that happening across the space right now as folks will come and they'll rent an EV for long periods of time, and have a higher thought to buy, and that's part of the intrigue of partnering with us from an OEM's perspective, is because it gets your product out there, lets people try it in a way that's maybe more natural to how they travel and live, and so that's taken off. Like in a great way for us. Really interesting.
And obviously, if we talk about the travel industry, airlines, hotels, everyone has their own sort of challenges. Danielle, I wonder if you could give us some insight in sort of companies you work for, ideas that you've seen in the space, and are there any specific ones that you're like, this is really inventive, this is really a good example of how travel companies are engaging their customers to become more sustainable?
Yeah. I think a few of them I would think about. First of all, Uber and the Hertz partnership with Uber, I think is a great example of that. Clearly Uber has big goals to electrify over the next few years, and I think how they've started to find other partnership opportunities to bring them on that path. Frankly, we see airlines and hotel players starting to move into that space as well. I think what we're seeing with some of and particularly the European airlines, although there's some examples here around green fares and actually really providing at the time of booking a much more sustainable ticket option. Europe's obviously a little bit farther ahead than we are in terms of some of the consumer demand for those products, but I think that's something we're going to continue to want to see more of. And Hertz has obviously done that. Some of the ride-sharing players have done quite a lot of that. I think that continues to be pretty exciting. Some of the players like Book Different and others, which happens to be a booking partner, is starting to provide more ability for consumers to actually seek out and book more sustainable options. We need a lot more of that actually in this industry. And then I think there's some folks with some pretty bold ambitions, like United and JetBlue are great examples of folks that are pulling multiple levers in a space where there's not clear technological answers in terms of what we're going to do with the future of air travel. So I think some of those comprehensive strategies are pretty pretty inspiring too.
Yeah, and I think in the report we highlight some of those as well. So I think, again, go read the report because it has a lot of amazing nuggets of information and ideas that you can follow. So finally, the final aspect is, of course, sustainability in many ways will cost money. It will cost money or time or effort. And so, but there are opportunities as well. And we obviously always like to talk about opportunities, and there are real ways of being able to really push the boundaries and make money off sustainability, right, as Hertz is doing at the moment. So for you at Hertz, what is sort of the vision of the future of car rental, and what opportunities are you seeing out there today where you say sustainability can really help us there?
Yeah, I think electrifying the fleets is a great ambition, right? But at the same time, I also think we have our North Star set on reducing vehicle ownership at the same time.
Sure, okay.
We really think that things are going to continuously to go more shared. And as that happens, there is less need for as many cars that are on the road today, right? And when you think about the power of reducing cars, plus the ones that you're replacing them with becoming zero-emission vehicles, it really becomes powerful.
Yeah.
And, as a critical backbone, to providing that, we see tremendous upside for our business as, in that shared model, there is an asset owner and manager who's helping to bring that to a platform that people can gain access to get to and from where they need to go.
Yeah.
And we see ourselves being a critical component to that.
Really interesting. Finally, Danielle, I mean, we're almost out of time, but we're talking about far into the future here most of the time, right? 2030, maybe even 2050 that we're working towards. I mean, these are big targets. They're far into the future, but we all kind of know that we need to start now, but it's easier to just keep going for now and maybe think of it later. What are some of the challenges, or how do companies decide what to do now, where to start, and if you have any sort of key takeaways, final point that you want to share with the audience, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things, right? First of all, I think getting clear on what your carbon footprint and your looks like today is super important. And by the way, that's more complicated than it appears, given that we still need clearer standards. I think there's also, really starting to think about the cost and emissions trade-offs of different sorts of actions. We obviously talk about in the report, but how do you start to think about thinking through different scenarios and different pathways that you can take to really change your curve and think about kind of the return, both from a financial perspective, which I think you guys have done very well, as well as from an emissions perspective, and really starting to think through those scenarios and making the right trade-offs between them. And I think, frankly, being very clear where there's questions in that, because the technology or infrastructure doesn't exist in much the same way you talked about right now. And we, frankly, need to lean in to make some bets that those will exist over time as we make those investments.
Yeah. Thanks very much both for being here. I really implore you to download the report. It's very actionable, actually. There's a lot of insights. It's not a big tome of information. It's 30 pages, I think. So it's not a hard read. It's actually quite light and really easy to follow. There's a checklist of where you can really see what has your company been doing so far and where do we need to really focus. So I really encourage you to download it, share it with your teams, and really get on the path of going towards net zero, I suppose. So thanks very much.